Greetings, everyone, and welcome to LOGOS Poetry Collective for a very special gathering featuring Heidi, Seaborn, and Diane Suess. My name is Travis Helms. I'll be serving as one of your MCs for this evening, along with my co-conspirator, Jason Myers, editor-in-chief of EcoTheo Review and co-director with me of EcoTheo Collective, where our mission is always, and our aim in all things, is to celebrate wonder. We're delighted to have two phenomenal poets here with us this evening in celebration of their most recent publications. Heidi Seaborn's newest collection, an insomniac slumber party with Marilyn Monroe, hit the proverbial runway and entered the world 1 week ago today. And Diane Suess's most recent collection, Frank Sonnets, was published in March this year by Pank Magazine and Grey Wolf Press. We're delighted to have Bookwoman, Austin's premier feminist bookstore, with us here this evening, as always, to facilitate online book sales. And you can find details for how to purchase Heidi's and Diane's beautiful works here in the chat field. There's a link we've dropped there. So LOGOS Poetry Collective offers liturgically inflected poem share events. This project began in 2019 with a conversation. I'm an Episcopal priest serving the University of Texas campus here in Austin, and I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine who's a Buddhist poet, and we were talking about how transactional poetry readings can sometimes feel. We discussed the ways in which it could feel that often either you're just simply passively absorbing poetry as an audience member or sort of just discharging or unloading it on people from the podium. We began wondering what it might look like to lovingly, artfully, non-dogmatically incorporate aspects of sacred ritual and liturgy into the format of a traditional poetry reading, and thus LOGOS was born. Typically, we congregate at Lazarus Brewing Company in East Austin, and we hope to be resuming live in-person gatherings soon. But for now, we're still translating LOGOS's liturgically inflected format onto the Zoom ether and live streaming to Facebook Live. So I'd love to give you just a quick sense of how tonight's event is going to unfold. Following this word of welcome, we're going to have an opening text presented on the screen in front of you. And you can think of this as sort of like an invocation to tonight's gathering, and it will set the emotional and thematic tone and tenor of our gathering. You'll see that portions of this Frank O'Hara text have been bolded for you on the screen. And though Zoom doesn't do a good job picking up from multiple microphone sources, I ask you to keep your microphone muted, but still to speak those bolded lines aloud into the space around you to add your voice to that of the collective. We'll then have a reading by our first poet, Heidi Seaborn, followed by a reading by our second poet, Diane Suess. Then we'll have some time for some curated conversation before we tell you what all is upcoming with LOGOS and EcoTheo Collective. And then we'll finish the evening by a benediction reading of a closing text, which we'll also read responsively. So friends, we're so very grateful that you've blessed us with your presence here this evening. And what I'll do now is ring this meditation bell and give us just a moment to ground and center ourselves in the space before we read this opening text together. So I'd invite you to close your eyes if you'd like, to perhaps bring your attention to your breath, to the presence of spirit, of mystery, of transcendence in the space about you. And we welcome you again with all you bring here as we begin this gathering.
So this is Animals, a poem by Frank O'Hara. Frank it sort of hovers over my newest collection. Have you forgotten what we were like then, when we were still first rate, and the day came fat with an apple in its mouth?
It's no use worrying about time, but we did have a few tricks up our sleeves and turned some sharp corners.
The whole pasture looked like our meal. We didn't need speedometers. We could manage cocktails out of ice and water.
I wouldn't want to be faster or greener than now if you were with me. Oh, you were the best of all my days.
Thank you, Diane and Heidi, for opening us with that beautiful reading. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our first poet, Heidi Seaborn. Today, I'm stuffed with doubt. When I wallow, the neighbors look away, and it's too early for a cocktail or even an aperitif, the sun high. So opens the woefully winsome, lovely and lonesome lament, selfie on a bad day, a crystalline little 17-line poem near the center of Heidi Seaborn's newest collection, An Insomniac Slumber Party with Marilyn Monroe, winner of the Pank Poetry Contest, in which sauntered the red carpet of publication into the world 1 week ago today. Seaborn's Slumber Party is composed of poems of charm and catharsis, dirge and dream life and desire, fitful revelry, and fierce won revelation, in which the poet's voice morphs into that of Monroe's until the distinction between the two slips quicksilver away. In a recent piece for LitHub, Seaborn muses on the volume's tutelary spirit, saying, I had thought I was channeling through her, Monroe. She was actually channeling through me. Her precedent became my presence and eventually a present, the gift of rewriting my own outcome. Vatic, enigmatic, vivifying. The voice Seaborn inhabits in these meditations on celebrity and performance culture help the reader to see the ways in which the lineaments of another's life can be, in Seaborn's words, reflection and projection both, and help clarify a self, a way of seeing and more deeply being. In addition to Slumber Party, Seaborn is the author of the full-length collection, Give a Girl Chaos, and the 2020 Comstock Prize chapbook, Bite Marks, as well as chapbooks Finding My Way Home and Once a Diva. Since Heidi started writing in 2016, after an almost 40-year hiatus, she's won or been shortlisted for over 24 awards. Her work has recently appeared in American Poetry Journal, Beloit Poetry Journal, Copper Nickel, The Slowdown with Tracy K. Smith, and countless other venues. She is executive editor of the Adroit Journal, serves on the board of Tupelo Press, and holds an MFA in poetry from NYU. Seaborn's selfie, quoted above, like so many of the poems in this collection, moves poignantly between postures of thoughtful pondering and paean, indictment and enticement, and opens ultimately as generous offering, as prayer. The poem concludes, for each bluebird day, there's one gone to hell, a Libra balancing act. For all the weight I've carried, Lord, tip the scales this way, and if not, I'll need concealer, the good kind, and yeah, a dirty martini, and please, oh exalted one, let me sleep on anything but Ambien. But enough about me. What's up with that big heart of yours? Have you an open chamber that I could crawl into and stay a while? How blessed we are to crawl into the capacious chamber of this large-hearted poet's presence and stay a while tonight as we welcome to Logos Heidi Seaborn.
Wow.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was a most generous introduction, Travis. And this is such a very special venue. I've come to many of these readings and they're just magical. And so I'm so happy to be reading here, and especially with Diane Suess, who is a rock star. And thank you, Jason, and thank you, friends, poets, for coming out. There's so many things calling to us right now, and thank you for spending time with us tonight. Okay. Well, you did such a good job of setting up this book, and I'm going to dive into sort of a section that's in the back a bit, sort of toward the end. Just one thing that you should know: it is it's sort of what I consider a middle of the night conversation between the speaker and Marilyn. They're both insomniacs, and sometimes the voices blur a little, so it may be clear who's speaking, and maybe it doesn't matter. So Marilyn herself was obviously an actress and played a lot of parts, but the biggest part that she played was Marilyn Monroe. And she created this character and had sort of an uneasy existence with the character. And this first poem is about that. Sometimes I just want to be Norma Jean. I slice myself in half like a lemon, leave Marilyn in the vestibule. Tell me, is she peering out the paned window as I tie on my scarf, settle my sunglasses, and step out in the half sunlit street? As I reach the East River, could I slip the railing and be pulled on a barge out to sea? We always leave each other like this, one or the other. I tell her I need to walk, shake the bones that scuff under my flesh. I don't tell her I may follow the trail of autumn leaves that color the sidewalk, disappear. One day I was imagining, I did a ton of research for this, and I was imagining Marilyn on the day before she died. And that's where this poem came from. Earthbound. Oh, lemon, I know nothing so sweet. Rough, fleshed, fallen fruit, we are so earthbound. Standing, knife in hand, peels curl the sink. Juice stings each slit, slight, my skin sunlit. Combustible as tinder, a warbler's nest, this short, flaming life. Seasonal disorder. Fallen pears, still that yellowish green. Chartreuse sounds too fancy for fruit that no one bothered to pick in its moment of ripeness. Fat bottoms swollen, sugared, weighted branches heaving. It will rain soon. The fruit browning, falling before the leaves that already mimic sunflowers in decay. Can I hit the pause button now? Stop before I mark another year without my father. His absence on my shoulders like the cardigan I carry around just in case. My mother's handbag bulges, a sweater, sewing, and first aid kits, bag of almonds, wool hat, umbrella, you never know. We're going to have a curated conversation later, and curating selves is something that is a big deal these days. And well, so this next poem is called Curating Death. Why not? When my father died, I wrote his obit, said he loved his family more than anything. After all, he'd become us in the end. I think of his face, the one I wear when alone, if I'm ever alone in the tick, tick, like Marilyn, alone, tick, tick, tick. She asked for Judy garlands over the rainbow and champagne silk lining her coffin. I want ashes, just ashes. So I have there's a poem that I wrote called Insomnia Diary. And for this book, I ended up taking it and scattering it throughout. So it just kind of, you get these little stanzas, they're time stamped, that appear. So that's what this is. 2:37 a.m. I hum like the dart and hover of bees in my lavender. I hum like a car engine hums in idle. My heart hums, vibrating. I count minutes, hours, each breath, countries I've visited, men I've known. So this book emerged out of my MFA. Yeah, you can get an MFA at any age, as it turns out. So I got mine at 60. Actually, I started it at 60. And I wanted to experiment with a couple things. One was writing in form, and one was writing in persona. And so I wrote in Marilyn's persona, and a lot of these poems started out in form. And the next one I'm going to read actually initially was a full Petrarchian's crown of sonnets, a sonnet. And we're going to hear wonderful sonnets from Diane, but this one started out as a very formal, long sonnet. And like many of the poems in this collection, but particularly this poem, I unraveled it and scrubbed it and got it down to a place where it fit that sense of being awake in the middle of the night, not quite of right mind, and in this case, to be dying. So this is what I think of as Marilyn's death poem. And just to set a little bit of a scene, she died in her bedroom and had been calling. So she called people over the course of the evening. In the afternoon, she called Dr. Greenson, who was one of her primary psychiatrists, to come over. He did, and then he left, and she continued calling. And so this poem takes some of the facts and obviously fictionalizes it. Hello, it's me, Marilyn, August 4th, 1962, 4:16 p.m. Dr. Greenson, are you there? My ears, I can't hear. Dr. Engelberg left me a satchel of pills. I've lined them up along the windowsill, like a string of pearls glistening round my neck. I feel lost in someone's garden. Ivy and jasmine tangle, a swarm of bees billowing the lavender. They honey and swirl the air. I'm in such a mood. Dr. Greenson, come rescue me. 7:10 p.m. Hello, Peter. Dr. Greenson's just gone. A dinner party tonight? Lovely. But I'm tired, need rest, already in bed, a mess. It's late, I've nothing on. I guess if Bobby's going to be around, I could wear that Balenciaga gown, have Whitey come fix my face. It's been stung, my eyes, lips, bees everywhere. I know I sound crazy. They swarm. No, Bobby, I'll stay home. Kiss Pat goodbye, the president too, and you, sweet guy. 7:27 p.m. Whitey, my prince, no need to come over. No president, no brother, no bother. I'm staying in with my hive. I'm their queen, pillowed by the buzz. Whitey, my love, don't worry. I'll sleep off this sadness. I promise, tomorrow. 10:23 p.m. I dreamt I had a father handsome as Clark Gable. At night, he'd hum me to sleep, and I'd dream I had a father who dreamt he had a daughter. He found her in the phone book under pretty. He found her at the orphanage in the city, lost amongst the wingless angels, piles of fallen stars. He found her drinking whatever's in style. Daddy, look me in the eye. You know it's me, your girl, the child you've never seen. Don't hang up I'm your Norma Jean. 10:49 p.m. Hello, little jelly bean. Hush, baby child. I lost you in the wilderness when you fled like a rabbit. I lost you in the ocean when you swam with rainbow fins. I lost you down the drain, a diamond ring. I lost my grip on you, sweet pink thing. Shh, don't cry. I lost you in a pillbox, but shh, don't tell a soul. I lost you. You were just a gust. I lost you to the bees. My head's a fuzzy hive. They stung my babies and left me alive. 11:24 p.m. Mama, remember me waving from up in the fig tree? You wore lemon yellow. You laughed. Remember that? Before the bees. Hear them sing, flickering wings. And now I'm going to end with a poem that'll take us up a little bit. It's the penultimate poem in the collection. Take that bow, then slag off. How is it I always find myself here, face to face, serum, eye cream, mascara, brow liner, blush, and lipstick? Oh, Lord. When did I become such a drag queen of you, a cuticle away from a real tiara? And now I've forgotten my Dior dress. I left it hanging. Come on, let's toast old Lang Syne, my friend, and the final cut in the can. Hurry up, please, it's time. Be a good girl, gulp your gin and grapefruit while I drink a gimlet. There's so much grief and glamour. Have you an opinion about genius? It's amazing what good cheekbones can do. Now take that bow, then slag off. Let the credits roll. Maybe there's a sunset, and I stride solo toward it, kitten heels in hand. Thank you.
Heidi, thank you so very much. We hope you'll take a bow, but not slag off. Those poems were as radiant and splendid as those flowers behind you. Thank you so very much. How do I explain this restless search for beauty or relief? Diane Suess asks in the opening poem of Frank Sonnets. It's a question all of us here this evening, we paramours of Duende, surely ask on a regular basis. If Suess's poems don't provide an explanation, they offer something better, which is the incarnational experience of that restlessness, that pursuit of beauty or relief. To enter a Diane Suess poem or book of poems is to find ourselves in a world that is, to borrow a line from her 2018 collection, Still Life with Two Dead Peacocks and a Girl, local, acute, and unrelenting. Or, to borrow another line, it is the world, italicized. Her poems are personal in the best sense, and the language that propels them is fierce, elegant, mordant, tender, and yes, frank. Consider the clear-eyed art of a line like, "The lambs this year are dumb, but lambs are dumb." Suess is a pastoral poet without any patience for nature in the sentimental versions we are given in greeting cards and Disney movies. In her work, nature is divine, terrifying and consoling, part of us and alien from us. How the ocean and the continent are essentially love on a terrible mission to meet up with itself, she exclaims in one sonnet. How even with the surface roiling, the depths are calmly nursing away at love. There's much nursing in her poems of animals, human and otherwise. There is great care shown by the speakers of these poems, and the reader is privileged to enter moments that are harrowing at times, hilarious at others. We witness the loss of parents, the loss of lovers, and the near death of a child. In her poems, Jesus is both softy and the daddiest daddy man, God elusive and omnipresent. Love is a disappointment and a delight. At the end of one of my favorite poems in Frank Sonnets, the speaker declares, none of it will last. If I may quote another master of the sonnet to refute Suess's claim, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, these poems will last. Still Life was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in Poetry. Suess's 2015 collection, Four-Legged Girl, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She is a 2020 Guggenheim Fellow. Poverty, like a sonnet, is a good teacher, Suess writes, and how lucky we are now to be her students. Friends, please welcome Diane Suess.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you, Jason. It's going to be hard to move forward from that. If it's written, I'd love a copy. Just briefly, I want to thank Travis Helms and for putting this beautiful evening together, and Jason Myers for those stunning words. And an introduction is good when you learn something about your own work. And Heidi Seaborn, who has this kick-ass new book, which I got to read early, and I love it in her. She's a generous, brilliant poet. Takes time to get to minimalism. Years lived through. Oh, the suffering. Yes, I'm in that camp. As Orr writes, we move from choked silence to blurted speech, to diary with its useless key, to story, to poetry, the most shaped, therefore most distant from the original crime. Even pleasure can be a crime, especially once it's lost, and happiness, the word, an assault on the tongue. Why, the patient asked the doctor, does everything taste bitter as the stems of dandelions? Even the tongue tasting itself tastes bitter. When I was a child, one night, all I could smell was blood. I told no one. It went on like that for months until a torrential rain laundered the air. Khan at 88, his lungs full of cancer, mind hijacked by dementia. Can't remember his own poems, nor holding a pen, though he accepts my reading them to him. That's a good one, he says, coughs. An urn-shaped moment, thus radiant, therefore true. Goldenrod, I could say, everybody wants something from me, but well, everybody wants something and nobody wants nothing from me. Goldenrod, towhead, beast. Goldenrod, you pack the meadows like gold-plated sardines. I have heart palpitations, but all forms of relief end with a kickback, like my aunt with the black eye who lied she was kicked by a horse. Free goldfinch comes to feast on thistles in May and perches and weaves and sings of its political exhaustion. Pisses me off, bird, to find out the devil from Sunday school is real. I didn't even have my own Sunday school, trespassed and thieved art supplies and gibberish. Had I only tied the play apron around my waist and faced the windy sun and watched your gold hermaphroditic wand sway. Dumbbell that I was, I sought a product called God, though the whole village was opulent with gilded heathens. Goldenrod, is your dying hard? I know, dying's hard. Are you reaching toward, or just reaching? I know it's the month when people are telling their stories about surviving AIDS or losing people to AIDS. And this poem is about my dear friend, Mikkel, who did die of AIDS in 1988, I believe. Things feel partial. My love for things is partial. Mikkel on his last legs, covered in KS lesions, demanded that I see the beauty of a mass of chrysanthemums. Look, he demanded. I lied that I could see the beauty there, but all I saw was a smear of yellow flowers. I wanted to leave that place. I wanted to leave him to die without me. And soon that's what I did. Even the molecule I allowed myself to feel of our last goodbye made me scream. What would have happened if I'd opened my heart all the way as I was told to do, if I wanted Jesus to live inside one of its dank chambers? Whitman told me to unscrew the locks from the doors, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Let love come streaming in, like when the St. Joe flooded Save-A-Lot and drove it out of business, the only store in town. Don't put my ashes in the river, Mikkel said. Put them in a tributary. I did. I put them in a tributary without touching them. Now I want to chalk my fingerprints with them, but it's too late. I want to hold them like he held me and touched my upper lip and called it Cupid's cusp, a phrase that made me wince. I felt love all the way then and never since. This is a new poem. It's called Comma. To never be touched again. That line has a sound. Hear it? In this case, I don't want to bring a story to it, not even an image. It has a sound. Listen. To never be touched. Oh, a nurse, a doctor, but never to be touched in that way. You know what way. Listen. Hear it. Let's not tag it with a feeling. Give me a break. What possible song would you play when you toss my ashes? Someone once asked me. There is no song, he said. Don't narrativize, Diane. Don't narrativize, Diane. See what a comma can do? There is a force that breaks the body, inevitable. The byproduct is pain, unexceptional as a rain gauge, which has become arcane. Rhyme likewise, unless it's assonant or internal injury. Gloom, joy, which is also a dish soap, but not the one that rids seabirds of oil from wrecked tankers. That's dawn, which should change its name to dusk. Irony being the flip side of sentimentality here in the Iron Age. Ironing out the kinks in despair, turning it to hairdo from hair. To do, vexing infinitive. Much better to be pain's host, body of Christ as opposed to the Holy Ghost. When I have been suffering at times, I could step away from it by embracing it. A blues thing, a John Donne thing. Divest by wrestling, then sing. And one a little new poem called Little Song, and then my final poem. This is Little Song. You can't stay vigilant and remain alive, or infinite vigilance is a kind of death, or you can't be present tense, that is, tense about the present. Here, you said in school, present, but you were not. Your mind back home eating sweet elephants from a jar, or placing Thumbelina in a milkweed car. What luxury to think of milkweed cars and cookie jars and turning lights on in the dark or lights off in the light, or dreams of dropping vigilance or memories of negligence, heedless in your posh knee socks, your ritzy lamb, your lush pop beads, your lilac jam, your breathless, deathless, feckless little song. And finally, my last poem. This is the last poem in Frank. And the Frank I mention, obviously, in the poem is Frank O'Hara, and you'll hear other names. I hope when it happens, I have time to say, oh, so this is how it's happening. Unlike Frank hit by a Jeep on Fire Island, but not like Dad, who knew too long, 6 goddamn years in a young man's life, so long it made a sweet guy sarcastic. I want enough time to say, oh, so this is how I'll go, and smirk at that last rhyme. I rhymed at times because I wanted to make something pretty, especially for Mikkel, who liked pretty things, soft and small things, who cried into a white towel when I hurt myself. When it happens, I don't want to be afraid. I want to be curious. Was Mikkel curious? I'm afraid by then he was only sad. He had no money left, was living on green oranges, had kissed all his friends goodbye. I kissed lips that kissed Frank's lips, though not for me a willing kiss. I willingly kissed lips that kissed Howard's deathbed lips. I happily kissed lips that kissed Basquiat's lips. I know a man who said he kissed lips that kissed lips, that kissed lips, that kissed lips, that kissed Whitman's lips. Who will say of me, I kissed her? Who will say of me, I kissed someone who kissed her? Or I kissed someone who kissed someone who kissed someone who kissed her? Thank you.
Diane, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna sit now and take in everything that you all just shared. this is the time of the evening where if we were at Lazarus Brewery in East Austin, you all would be refreshing your drinks and visiting with your table mates, and we would ask you these questions about the poems that you heard. You know, which elements in these poems moved you? How did the language help create the emotional experience you had hearing or reading the poem? And what might this poem be inviting you to consider or live into in the context of your own life? And we're hoping very soon to be able to offer Logos gatherings in person again. But in the meantime, as we're all gathered here, Travis and I are just going to ask Diane and Heidi a few questions and have a little bit of conversation, and then invite you all to offer any questions you might have into the chat. So I was thinking as I was reading your poems and then listening to you this evening that voice is such a strong quality in both of your work. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about when you feel that you found your way to the voice of a poem, whether that is a poem in your voice, or, you know, as in the case of the Maryland poems, obviously those are poems in the voice of a persona, but how you go about inhabiting voice on the page, however you think about doing that.
You gonna go for it, Heidi?
Okay, I'll go for it. All right. So, well, I think particularly in this book, because I was writing a lot in persona, it was a the whole idea of voice became complicated and yet clarifying, in that often I'm just writing. I'm writing, and this is going to sound weird, but whatever. I'd have this sense that Marilyn would tap me on the shoulder and say, "No, this is my poem," and then it would become her poem. And sometimes I would wrest it back and give it to the speaker. So there was very much a collaboration between these characters that I was creating, the speaker, which is some odd version of the poet who's an odd version of myself, and Marilyn, who's an odd version of Norma Jean, and somebody that I've created. So you have these sort of versions of self, and amongst that, trying to then create some clarity on of voices was a challenge, and then it became very easy, because I settled into it, and I knew what I wanted to say in each poem, and the poems then sort of write themselves at some point.
Having read your book couple 10 times, I think there's something that a persona like you managed it can allow you to do and say that you might not have been able to say, sort of playing yourself. And also you give Marilyn space that she didn't have in life to say things. So it's really, the interaction is really moving. For myself, every poem is a crapshoot, really. And I have found myself through the pandemic and through the last 5 years politically, just feeling more and more sort of numb or benumbed. And looking back to how I learned numbness as a strategy for survival, and not wanting to do that so much. And so these poems in Frank and what I'm writing now, maybe even more, are pushing back on that numbness, and using voice in a way that names experience and says what's so. And I hope even when they're crass or angry or whatever, in a way that's ultimately loving, because that's what I feel. That's what I feel. But I think in Frank, you see all the defenses at work too, So a form like the sonnet really helps a writer, I think, when you're facing tough material, to kind of give a structure to the voice that if you didn't have it, it might be too overwhelming.
Yeah, I love the thought of what the form can do for the emotional power of what the poet is trying to express. And I was trying to find one of the sonnets I was reading. I read the book a few weeks ago, and then I just moved household, and I was going back through some of the poems and trying to find ones that had really sunk into me, and I couldn't find the one where you say something about like what poetry isn't, Diane, or sort of like poetry not being the language or even the kind of the music or rhythm. And I don't know if that's if that is evoking for you what poem I'm trying to think of. But
yeah, I'm trying
yeah, it made me think of one of my favorite definitions of poetry is Jack Gilbert's, who says that poetry is witnessing to magnitude. And I wonder how the two of you think about what is poetry? What is this thing that we're doing?
Oh. All right, you're on the spot on that one, Diane.
Oh God. Well, I feel like every time I write a poem, I'm trying to answer that question. And especially now, I've been alone in the house for a long time, kids. And as a lot of you have been. And is that a rooster? I hope so. Anyway, I think what I've been up against in that aloneness is really asking the question, what can poetry be now? What can poetry be up against, say, January 6th, up against the cruelties and ignorances that we've seen in ourselves? And every time I sit down to write now, I have to kind of answer or find an answer to that question. I must love it because I've been doing it for 50 years. But I think poetry is sort of a squishy, nebulous thing. It doesn't let itself be fully understood. It's a mystery, and it's bigger. I think it's bigger than we are. It's like Heidi was saying about Marilyn coming to her. I feel like it really is a interaction with the dead, if you allow it. If you allow it.
I don't know that I can add much to that except to say I agree, and I think after this time that we have lived through, where sort of more people have come to poetry, which is wonderful. Poetry in sort of the classic description, poems on a page, and found their way to poetry. And I think in the process, hopefully, have found their way to that larger concept of poetry, the idea of living a poetic self. And so what we put on the page hopefully leaps off the page and infects as well as inflects.
Yeah, I think of what's on the page as sort of like the shell of the cicada. It's an artifact of a process. Yeah. Thought I'd bring in cicadas.
Yes.
Bring them on in.
Hopefully it doesn't take 17 years.
Let them swarm. I mean, that's such a fascinating and evocative question, sort of the one about what poetry can work in us. And I'm kind of curious about what the writing of a poem works in you as the author, the creator, the collaborator with the dead, with the departed, with other sort of poets in a matrix or lineage or tradition. And I guess like I loved, Diane, hearing you say that you can still see your defenses at work in the Frank sonnets. And Heidi, you've written just and reflected really movingly on how the writing of this book and your discovery of Marilyn and this journey with her and into her in some way helped affect very real kind of change in your own life. And so I'm kind of curious about, I guess like there might be two questions. Like one is, you know, what does the writing of a poem, what can it accomplish in you as its author? And then two, are there ways in which you feel like in the writing of a poem, your maybe weaknesses or defenses or foibles in some way can kind of become a strength, that it's sort of like your greatest weakness becomes your greatest gift or superpower in a way, if that doesn't sound too paradoxical?
I'll take on the second question. Heidi, maybe you want to do the first one, but I just want to say I love books where the speaker isn't the hero, and I'm not a hero. And if you read the book, you'll know that. And I think the good thing, well, there's, you know, it's a confession in the broadest sense to not being the hero, to being a human being. And if you make that confession in the presence of others, then it gives others the right to be human and to not be heroic all the time. So that I feel that the best poems come out of not being right, but having been wrong.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think it's almost the opposite of a superpower, in that, you know, there's this intense vulnerability that when you are exposing yourself, but also exposing yourself as a poet, as a person on the page, I think there's that vulnerability, and maybe in the process of that, you find your strength, you find your superpower. But I don't know that it's the superpower, but it is that intense vulnerability, and that then translates into a place, as Diane was saying, where the rest of the world can connect in, and hopefully, you know, hopefully we can see ourselves in, I mean, I do. When I read Frank, I saw Diane, and I saw so much of myself and it was inspired by so much of that. And that's what we want to do, is make that connection. And so maybe that's the superpower, but it comes from a place of absolute vulnerability and almost humility and helplessness sometimes.
I mean, what a thing to be able to read John Donne wrestling with God, or Keats right at the end of his young life, right? You know, reaching his hand out to the future reader, or Emily Dickinson building a theology in her bedroom. I don't know how I'd live without those voices. And so I can't help but feel, I'm not them, obviously, but that there's something to adding your voice to theirs. It's, in a way, it's an act of gratitude and hope that you leave something behind. I mean, that's what the kissing poem is about, really, is to hope that you will make that connection and leave some moment of intimacy, at least, behind for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, there's such a different kind of sort of heroism or posture of heroism. When you mentioned Keats, I was thinking of, the difference between, say, on first looking into Chapman's Homer and then This Living Hand. There's that immense vulnerability. But I mean, I think to name and to enact that confession in the broad sense you were referencing, I mean, there's something absolutely heroic about that, because it's just so damn courageous and really does, I think, extend permission to others to own that vulnerability and imperfection and fallibility and mess and all of it. And it's like, then the stars come out of the chaos, it's, I don't know, just meaning gets constellated in this beautiful way.
I love it that Keats is angry too, that he, like, give me your blood so I can live again.
Yeah.
And of course, that's what he felt.
Yeah.
That was a brave thing to say, I would think.
Yeah, I would think so too. I mean, and he's not just trying to eke another poem out of it. Like, there's something really at stake for him in that poem.
I mean, it was written in the margins right before he died of a bigger poem,
Yeah. Jason sort of began to ask you about your relationship with form. And I just loved, Heidi, that line that you just sort of said in passing about beginning the Petrarchan crown sequence and then saying that you were unraveling and scrubbing a form. And I mean, I just love what you do with the sonnet as well, Diane. And you mentioned a little bit how sort of a form can give you maybe something to like wrench up against or contain. But I mean, how do you think about form? Like, in what ways is it a tool? In what ways is it something to be dismantled? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
I think, form to me is so useful in that it becomes a distraction that forces you to get to the heart of the matter. So, and it's a weird thing, but it works, right? It just works. And that, Diane, I've heard you talk about the need for sort of the guardrails or that comes with having to be restricted to 14 lines, and having written so many of these poems in a lot of different forms, and using that to sort of deal with some very rough material. I think, I think the form served its purpose, but then it didn't. At some point, I needed to discard it and just leave the remnants of it, because I needed to also mimic that state of sleeplessness and of mental health issues, and so that too became a tool. The building up within a form and then the destroying of what I'd built.
It's like the female praying mantis biting the head off the mate. With our bugs, I'll stay with our insect. Yeah, with poetry, there's no right answer. There's no form is good or form is bad, or form should be rebelled against, or tradition should be rebelled against or not. It's all yes and no, and I love that about it. And just when you think you got it, you got to give it away.
Yeah.
So, it's been really hard for me to move on from the sonnet in my new work, because I feel like I'm, performing without a net. Mm-hmm. But that's, you gotta do that eventually too.
Keep taking risk and challenge yourself in a way. Are there other ways? Heidi, I loved what you said about form sort of forcing you into the place you really need to go and maybe tell the truth in a different way. Are there other ways, just sort of in your practice and process, Heidi and Diane, that you're able to kind of trick yourself or coax yourself or guide yourself into that kind of truer place where maybe you didn't know you were going when you first set pen to page or fingers to keys?
I think that's part of revision, right? I mean, for me, the most fun part is revision, because it's an excavation where you're getting in there and things emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get even to another layer of truth when you share it with others, and there's usually another interpretation, and you realize that is actually where that poem needed to go all along, and you knew that's your subconscious was there, and it's just like this amazing thing that happens. And so I think it's once the poem is in a draft form that it finds its deeper truth through revision. For me, at least, that's what I've discovered.
I mean, at this point, I feel like I know my own bullshit. And so I can only sustain bullshit so long before I catch myself. And it's always easier than being honest or taking the next risk. But it's not what I want to do with my life at this point.
Yeah.
So, some of it is just the practice, just like anybody, whether they're writing poems or not, the practice of staying honest with yourself, which is always a lifelong struggle.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I was sent a question via direct message here, which kind of taps into that sort of question of maybe soul making or something in the process of, as it connects to the process of writing. And the question is, can you both discuss ways in which writing these collections changed you and the things you learned over the course of time you worked on these two collections?
Yeah.
You want
Well,
The silence is always a sign that it's a good question. Cutting to the quick.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been a lifelong insomniac, and at one point I did think that was actually a superpower, and I've written about that recently, but I, in the last 10 years realized it wasn't at all, and it was something that I needed to take care of. But it wasn't until I was writing this book that I really came to terms with it, because I suddenly realized that was, that was what initially took Marilyn into addiction, and that was it's a slippery slope and an easy place to go. And so, yeah, I mean, that's in the process of writing this collection, I came to terms with my own issues, and then that came into then that becomes part of the whole book. And but it wasn't there when it wasn't there until till my thesis semester, when I just ripped it apart and I rewrote the whole thing with that understanding of myself. So it was a real reckoning. Yeah. And useful.
Yeah, I think, each collection has taught me something new. But in this collection, in Frank, it asked me to look at my whole life and not sort of it's easy to take on one little piece at a time, but this was a sweeping look, and not just at a life, but at how a person remembers a life, or how what the larger patterns are in a life. So I think it was harder in the sense of really that thing we talked about earlier, that coming to terms with my own culpability in situations, and in all the losses and all the gains. So I think what I learned is that by increments, in the increments of these poems that are all the same, take up the same amount of space, that it was my job to enact and come to terms with my whole life.
Yeah. Beautifully and powerfully and painfully, all of those P words. It's all there. And well, anyway, I love Diane's book. I love all of Diane's work, but yeah, this book is amazing. So I encourage everyone to read it. And now.
Well, I think for me, one of the amazing things is the emotional range, and so many of those early poems that are kind of childhood recollection have this sweetness, and they just seem like a lot of them were like really fun for you to write. It's I think of the Frost thing, like no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, and I was thinking like no humor in the writer, no humor in the reader. Both of you write poems that we've been talking a lot about a lot of serious things, and your poems are very serious and address a lot of heavy and painful things, but they also have this lightness and humor. And I wonder if you could talk about how you go about achieving that sort of, I think of it as like emotional chiaroscuro, where it's like the shading of the work so that it's it's not too flip or glib or whatever, but it's also not too somber or self-serious.
It's a really good question, because I know with Frank, I really had to think about, there's 130 or so sonnets. Like, nobody can take the heavy, and I'm not like that. I mean, my basic nature is sort of fun, and so there's poems like, what living means, tits out, tits in the rain, and I think that's the part of the speaker that is sort of the pushback against. And even in the poems, there's a section of poems with my son and his struggle with addiction, but there's a lot of in our interactions that is really humorous. It's definitely the way my family manages suffering, and it's part of how I see, think, and make language. So I really wanted there to be a range in this book, sort of, intelligent, philosophical, ridiculous, meditative, narrative, storytelling, singing, all of those things. All the things that make up a person.
Yeah. Well, certainly achieved. And I think because I was channeling the persona of Marilyn Monroe, and if you look at her body of work and just who she was as a person, she was funny, and she was clever and wry, and a little naughty, and I think I'm all those things too. And so, so it was actually pretty easy because I looked at it as a conversation between the two of us. If we were to stay up all night and drink martinis and tell stories, we would laugh and we would cry. And that's what's in this book. And yeah, so it's fun. And then when you assemble the book, which, I mean, 130 sonnets, think about that. But in this, assembling where you want to create those moments of lightness. I mean, even tonight, after that very tough death poem, Hello, It's Me, Marilyn, I knew I needed to end with something that was a little more glib and fun. So I think that's part of it too, is that just like, I mean, it is, and at some point, it's gotta be entertaining in what form that takes.
Well, I feel like Heidi and Diane and Jason's beautifully resonant phrase, this has been such an emotional chiaroscuro, just having a chance to range across all manner of topics with you both. And I feel like we could easily turn this into an insomniac's slumber party. And like that line of yours, Heidi says in one of the visitations that Marilyn turns down the tea you offer and takes vodka instead, and says we're gonna be up all night and in this for the long haul. And we would love that. And just to everyone on the call, Heidi and Diane have graciously offered to stay on this Zoom call for an extra couple minutes once our formal program ends. So if you have any questions that have been sitting on your heart, any thoughts or words of praise and gratitude you'd like to offer the poets, please linger around with us. But we'd love to just give everyone a sense of what's upcoming with Logos, what EcoTheo Review's up to, and then we'll say a closing benediction poem together. So Diane, Heidi, thank you so very much for your luminous readings, for your generous and gracious answers and responses in time in this conversation. It's just such a blessing to hold this space with y'all.
Thank you. Thanks so much for hosting us.
This
was so cool. Thank you.
Of course.
Was. And we're not done yet. There's one more poem. So.
Yeah.
There's one more poem. And before we get there, we just want to give folks a chance to know again how to access your wonderful work and how to connect with you. So we're going to drop a couple links here in the chat. And you'll see if you scroll up, and I'll drop them again, but we do have a link to Bookwoman, which is Austin's premier feminist bookstore. Susan Post, our wonderful collaborator, is here on the call. And I believe, although they're not available through this link, I believe, Heidi, she has copies of Insomniac Slumber Party too, right? So you can either message Susan or me or Jason, or you could navigate to Bookwoman's online bookstore and find a way to get a copy of your wonderful most recent collection. And then Jason, do you want to say a word about everything we've got going on this next month and beyond?
Yeah, so we are headed to Wyoming next month. We're really thrilled and exhilarated. Our board member Spencer Reese has been envisioning and bringing together this incredible festival that we hope will be the first of many to take place in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So it'll be a weekend long of readings and workshops with Spencer and Diane Glancy, Joanna Klink, Carrie Fountain, Paisley Reckdahl, and Mark Wunderlich. And the whole thing will culminate with a reading by Gregory Pardlow and two of our Starshine and Clay Fellows. So the Starshine and Clay Fellowship is an initiative that we launched in collaboration with Cave Canem to honor the legacy of Lucia Clifton and to support the work of Black poets who have yet to publish a full-length collection. So there are 4 fellows, 2 of them, one lives in Japan and one lives in somewhere in the UK, I believe. And so sadly, they're not able to make it to Wyoming with us. So they'll be reading later in the in the fall virtually. But two of them are going to be with us in Wyoming to read with Greg. And in September, we're going to have a virtual reading like the one this evening with Kava Akbar and Dinesh Smith. And then we're finalizing the rest of our autumn schedule for Logos. I'm getting ready to send off the summer issue of the magazine, the EcoTheo Review, to the printer. That's the cover of our spring issue with cover art by Spencer Reese. In addition to being a fabulous poet, is just published a book of watercolors, and that's a watercolor of Jackson Hole. So the summer issue features wonderful cover art by Joanne Weiss and some other great visual art, as well as an interview with Greg Pardlow and an interview with Kathleen Dean Moore, a great nature writer, essayist, and the poetry of the Starshine Fellows and finalists, some great fiction and an essay by David Naiman, the host of our favorite podcast, Between the Covers. So a lot of exciting stuff happening. You can find out more about all of our work at ecotheo.org. So learn about upcoming Logos gatherings and details about Wonder in Wyoming and the magazine, how to read it and submit work and subscribe. And that's what's coming up in our world.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you again, Diane and Heidi. It's been such a transcendent evening, and we'll close now by reading a responsive poem as benediction in the way that we began our gathering this evening, with an opening invocation. So once again, I'll ring our meditation bell and give it just a moment to reverberate into the space. So I'll invite you again to ground and center yourselves in whichever space it is in which you find yourself, to close your eyes if you like, to connect with your breath, and then with your microphones muted, to read the bolded lines of our closing text and to add your voice to that of the collective.
Kiss of the Sun by Mary Ruefle. If, as they say, poetry is a sign of something
among people, then let this be prearranged now.
Between us, while we are still peoples, that
at the end of time, which is also the end of poetry,
and wheat and evil and insects and love,
when the entire human race gathers in the flesh,
reconstituted down to the infant's tiniest fold,
and littlest nail, I will be standing at the edge
of that fathomless crowd with an orange for you,
reconstituted down to its innermost seed, protected
by white thread in case you are thirsty, which
does not at this time seem like such a wild guess.
And though there will be no poetry between us then,
at the end of time, the geese all gone with the seas,
I hope you will take it and remember on earth,
I did not know how to touch it. It was all so raw.
And if by chance there is no edge to the crowd,
or anything else, so that I am of it,
I will take the orange
and toss it as high as I can.
Yay.
Yay, indeed. Heidi, Diane, thank you so much for being here with us, for blessing us with your poetry and presence. And to everyone on the call, I'll stop the live stream to Facebook, and feel free to hang around for some time of conversation and connection with our poets. Thanks for being here, friends. Go in peace, and we'll see you soon.